Folks, maybe you're not interested in building this dining room table, but I would encourage you to watch this video because it's full of tips, tricks, and mistakes you're going to want to avoid on your next project. Hello folks, Chad Stanton here, a professional woodworker of over 20 years, and I'm here to share my experiences with you. So I have been doing a series on building this mid-century dining room table, and this is actually part 5. Now in my last video I mentioned that this was going to be a short one, but what I realized then that part 5 was going to be short, part 6 was going to be kind of medium, and well, I just kind of want to get this series all wrapped up, so I decided to make part 5 a long one and just get this video done. Now, if you haven't seen the previous videos, don't worry about them. I got a link in the description below. But these videos are set up not so much to build the table, but to show you the process, the problems, and the solutions during any kind of build. All right, so in the last video where I last left off, I was doing the pre-assembly. So I was doing a lot of dry fitting together. And this required me to put it together and knock it apart many times. And by doing that, well, I hence made my first problem. So let's take a look at what that was and the solution to fix it. Okay, so I got the whole thing disassembled. I'm getting ready to do the final sanding on it. And I've noticed that looking at the leg, I have a few little dings on it, probably from assembling and disassembling. Now here's a trick that I want to show you that only works when the wood is naturally, okay? It's, if you already stained it, if you already put a top coat on it, this won't work. The wood still has to be in its natural state of form. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in to a couple of dents here. Okay, so you can clearly see that one. That's pretty good, and it's not showing up on the camera too well, but I got a couple little under ones here. But this one's going to come out real nice. So the first thing that I do is I'm going to take some water. I'm going to put a drop on that. I'm just going to give that a second. Then the next thing I do is I have a small piece of rag here, and I'm going to dip this in the water, okay? And I'm going to lay the rag over that so the rag is wet. And then the last thing I do is I take a hot tip on a soldering iron, and let me just see where it's at again. Okay, and so what this does is the steam causes those wood fibers to swell, and 9 times out of 10 the dent will come out. A lot better. I still can see a little bit there, just a little bit. Much better. Looks great. Once that dries, I can sand it and I'm good to go. Say, here's a little tip for you. I make certain that I never throw out any of the scrap from my project until the job actually leaves my shop. And here's why. I notice I have a tiny little gap in a couple of places. So with the scrap that I threw on the floor, I'm going to be able to cut some of this, tuck it in there, shave it off, and no one will be the wiser. I take a lot of time to try and think ahead of all the steps that are necessary during a build, but I got a little bit ahead of myself here. As you can see, I have the side assembly already together, and yet I forgot to put a groove in the inside of this apron. That is where the buttons are going to go in to hold the top on. So now I actually have to do a plunge cut with the router to fix that mistake. Let me give you a little update where I'm at with this. This is actually my second time gluing and clamping it all together. I put the clamps on the ends, and as I was tightening it up, I noticed the stretcher down here
started to bow, that was because somehow I screwed up and made this middle stretcher about 1.25 inches too long. And although I wanted a little bit of tension on that, 1.25 inches was way too much. So real quickly before the glue set, I had to knock it apart. Now I did leave the clamp on this side to dry because I figured I could get the other pieces in over there. A couple of things that I did that helped clamping this up was I took a couple of scrap pieces of wood. That allows me now, the scrap wood is cut at 6 degrees, just like the angle of the leg here, and that allows me to get a nice square edge on the clamping surfaces. The other thing I did too was I put a clamp right in the middle here, and what that's doing, it's holding the center stretcher tight to the pipe clamp, because as I tightened down on the pipe clamp, it wanted to bow that stretcher out. So just by putting a clamp across the middle there allowed me to get plenty of pressure on it. So now I'm going to let this sit and dry and move on to the next step. So I've took the time to actually hand plane the top to get it smooth. Now I still have the sanding to do, but what the planing did was it removed any high-low spots. I helped remove some nicks or some tear outs that was on the boards, and here's the tools that I use for that. So I either have a low-angled or a high-angled plane with a toothed blade in it. The toothed blade will work good going against the grain. It helps with where grain changes. It eliminates the tear out. After that, I'll switch to a fine set high-angled blade. This helps remove the toothing marks. From there, I use a cabinet scraper, which gets it even cleaner. And then if there's any little small divots, marks left behind, I like to use a card scraper. And a block plane, I use the block plane for some areas too, small areas. Okay, at this point it's smooth and looks clean. Now I'm going to go through the sanding process to get it super smooth. So after taking the time to plane this, I noticed that there was a few little splotchy areas on the wood. I mean, it literally looked like I spilled something on it, but I didn't. So I showed it to Dennis, and Dennis thinks that it has to do with some kind of acid that's naturally in the tree itself. And so he recommended this product. It's just called wood bleach, but it's an oxalic acid. So I'm going to mix a little bit of this up and put it on there and see if that can help remove that stain. All right, so you can see the spots that I'm going to try and remove. Bleach on there now, and we'll see what happens. I've never used it before. Okay, it didn't eliminate it, but it did reduce it some. It's not quite as noticeable, and I'm hoping when I put the stain on, it doesn't become noticeable again. But anyhow, it did work to some degree. All right, so you see it did help remove or lighten the stain somewhat. I don't know if it's going to be completely unnoticeable after the stain's put on, but it did help. And I have to admit that I started off by following the directions on this in the right proportions, mixed with warm water, and it didn't look like it was doing much, so then I just kind of just went freewheeling with it and mixed a whole bunch in. That seemed to definitely help. I just hope it doesn't cause a problem with the stain now. But anyway, I got plenty of time for that to dry. I still got all the sanding to do. So hopefully this won't be an issue when I put that stain on, but we'll find out. To attach the top to the rest of the table here, I made these what they call buttons. So there's a hole in it, and you can see that there's a little tongue that sticks out, and that's going to go in the groove. And what this allows is that screw goes up through this into the top, but that groove still allows it to slide for the seasonal expansion and contraction. Now, because the top and the sides are angled at 6 degrees, I had to make this little tongue at 6 degrees. So making this wasn't too hard. I just simply raised the blade up and angled it at 6 degrees, and first made that angle cut on the edge here. Then I just lowered the blade and made several passes, nibbling away until I had that tongue on it. Then it's just a matter of case of drilling a series of holes in it, and then I'll just cut them off to make my individual little buttons. All right, so at this time here, I'm going to put the buttons in, and you can see I'll be able to just put the screw in, and then that'll be attached. But this is the winter time, which means the wood is shrunk at its smallest. And come summertime, when this expands, I don't want this button pushing against the stretcher, causing this thing to bow at all. So what I'm going to do is I have a small scrap piece of wood. That's the wood is half the thickness of that rabbet. So I'll put that in there, put my screw in. Take that piece of wood out. And that way I have a little bit of space there, so in the summertime when this expands, it shouldn't push against my stretcher. I already got all the buttons on, and now the bottom is married to the top. Now I'm very happy with it, and I feel that I've took everything into account. I got it secure, I have the top joined up well, I've accounted for wood movement, but Dennis thought it might be a good idea, my good friend Dennis Laney. He said one extra thing I could do to make sure that the top doesn't do any kind of cupping would be to put a wide, thick board in here to act as a batten. So I have one here. And I don't know if you can see in it, but I've put some elongated holes. Again, that way when the screw goes through this, as that top wants to seasonally move, that screw can slide in the opening. And also too, I took at this time to put on the bottom of this board, I like symbolism. So I have a circle, a triangle, and some numbers. And if you're curious what this symbol means and represents, well, I wrote a little article for one of my blogs on the website, and I'll have that link below in the description if you're curious to learn about this meaning and other meanings in woodworking. So let me tell you the procedure I use to do the staining and the finish on this. Now, for the majority of it, I use the Crystal Lac products. So once I had this sanded down, and I sanded with 80, 100, and 150 grit sandpaper. I then used their wood grain filler. This allowed me to fill in any kind of pores on this wood because I really wanted this to be super smooth when it was done. After that, I sanded it with a 220, and then I used their sanding sealer on it. After I put the sanding sealer on, again, I sanded the whole top with 220. From there, then, I put the stain on. Now, let me explain to you why I did sanding sealer first and then stain. I figured birch was probably going to be like maple or cherry, and that is it would splotch. And what happens is the wood absorbs that stain at different rates, and it really has a very uneven consistency look to it then. So by putting a sanding sealer on it, you help minimize that different absorption rate. So that's what I did. And then I put the stain on. Now, Crystalac does offer different stains. However, my client wanted the color to match another piece of furniture that they had in the house. And so what I wound up doing was I took a drawer front from that other piece of furniture and took it to a local paint store, which is a 21st Century Paint. And they color-coded and matched a colored stain to that drawer front. The only problem with this is oil-based, where the Crystalac products are all water-based. So what I did was when I put this on, I waited many days for the gases of the oil-based product to evaporate off. I was concerned two things. One, if I put a water-based over it right away, that you would have, a reaction of water and oil mixing together. They kind of repel. So that was the first concern. The second concern I had was if I put the water-based products on top, and even though I didn't have that reaction, what I was concerned was that the gases would still be trapped underneath it, and then my finish would look kind of cloudy or milky. So I waited many days before I moved on. And what was the next step I moved on? I put another coat of sanding sealer on it. Okay, then for the actual top coat on it, I used the Crystalac Extreme Protection, the polyurethane. This was the satin finish. And what I like about this, once again, because it's water-based, it has low VOCs, it dries really quick, but it's also a really hard finish. This won't yellow, it won't fade, and it's great protection, say like for a hot coffee cup or a cold beer that would rest on it. It'll stand up really well. And I did 7 layers on this, so I should have plenty of protection for a very long time on this table. Now, some issues I had with my staining process. Remember when I was using the wood bleach, I had wondered if it was going to give me some problems when it came time to staining, and well, it did. The problem though was on my part. So I told you I mixed a stronger concentration than what was recommended on the directions. And I put it on at the end of the day. I went in, came out in the morning, and it worked. I was so happy it worked, I failed to finish reading the directions. What I was supposed to do was neutralize it with some baking soda and water. Not thinking, I went ahead and when I put the grain filler on, sanded it off, and then did my first coat of the sanding sealer, I noticed a slight little halo ring around the spots where I'd used the bleach. That probably should have made me stop there, but I moved forward. Once I put the stain on, I didn't notice it much at all. So I thought I was getting better. Once again, then I told you I put another coat of sanding sealer on, and the rings came back. In fact, they came back and the stain now was starting to look lighter than the rest of the stain. So instead of it being a dark spot, how it originally started off, it now was a light spot. So I tried to take some of the Crystalac dyes that they have, and I mixed up a little batch color, and I tried to dab it on the area that needed to be darkened up. And it looked like it was working. So I put a coat of the top coat on it, and I probably got 2 layers of top coat into it, and it kept getting whiter and whiter and whiter, and I was going crazy over it. So I called David Shepard there at Crystal Lac and, asked him what I was doing wrong. And what David suggested was I probably should have used a vinegar of some sort to neutralize that bleach, and that's when I realized I didn't read all the directions. He said the vinegar would stop that reaction. He said what was happening was the products, because they were water-based and the bleach was mixed with water, that the water in the two was reactivating that bleach. So he suggested I let it completely dry overnight. So I gave it a full 24 hours to dry, kind of air off. I had a fan running on it all night to help air off anything that was trying to escape. And then, because I was a little concerned still of putting a water-based product back on it and reactivating it, I took a little bit of spray can shellac, and just in that spot, hit it, let that dry, lightly sand it, and proceeded with the rest of the top coats, and it looked great. But I needed that dye still from Crystal Lac that I mixed to bring it back up to color. But it worked. You can't even notice where the spots are on it. So happy, panicked, frustrated, but satisfied in the end.
All right, there you go. That wraps up the mid-century dining room table build. I really was very happy with the way the table came out, as well as the customer was thrilled with it as well. Now, as far as some upcoming videos, I do have a really nice arts and craft end table that I did a while back. I filmed the whole making of it. But once again, it's a lot of footage, a lot of material for me to go through and edit. I will do that as a series build in the future. But because I'm so busy in the shop right now, I think I'll do some shorter videos for you. One is going to be a cabinet tip video that I'll have out next month for you. And I'm also going to go back to the Should You Own It series, which is a tool that I use in my shop that I would recommend for you. And these are tools that I'm not paid to endorse or promote by any means. I get nothing out of it. It's strictly a tool that I bought and use and thoroughly enjoy and just want to share it with you. Also, too, if you're interested in seeing the jobs that I'm building for my customers, you can sign up for my Instagram page and take note at the progress that those projects are doing for others. Also, too, if you want to show a project that you are making in your shop, well, you can join us on Facebook in our group page called What Are You Doing?, where you can show off your projects, you can ask questions, and just get inspired by other fellow woodworkers. Of course, if you visit my website, woodshopandtime.com, there's plenty of free stuff there for you. You can go to the suggested tools page, which once again is a whole long list of tools that I use and links to that. I also have a recommended reading list of a lot of books. I have over 200 books in my collection, and every month I add 3 more books on that list that will help give you information and inspire you. Of course, there's free blogs that I've written over the past, and there's plans on there that you can purchase, and even some free plans that you can download for yourself. So if you get a chance, please visit the website. Well, as always, if you are working on a project in your shop and need some help, well, feel free to email me at woodchoppingtime@gmail.com, because my whole goal is to make you a better woodworker. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, keep on dancing.